Welcome, searchers and seekers. We are in 2 Kings, and in the first chapter we have the interesting character of Baal-zebub, and it's pronounced various ways. And this goes all the way to the New Testament. And there's some variations on the name Baal-zebub. First of all, Baal, we are already familiar with. Baal is a Canaanite god, a storm god, like Yahweh in some ways. But Baal-zebub means Lord of the Flies, and that's probably an intentional mistranslation by the Hebrew writers. So it should be Baal the Prince, but they turn it into Baal of the Flies. Baal means Lord, like the Hebrew Adonai. This is a Baal of the Flies. And in the story here, King Ahaziah has fallen through his house. Something has broken. He's fallen through, and he goes and questions Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron. And Elijah does not like that. Why don't you come to him, come to Yahweh for information if you will heal? Now, in the New Testament, this becomes spelt a little different. Beelzebul, with an L at the end, Beelzebul. So it's spelt differently, and it actually means something a little bit different. So this idea of Baal, instead of being this local Canaanite deity, Beelzebul has become a name for the Lord of all of the demons. So there's been some aggrandizement, some change in what Baal means. So Ahaziah ends up sending 50 men to Elijah, and Elijah is very upset, and he says, "If I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50." And it does. So here it's another 50 people terminated because he looked to another god for predicting the future. So there is another 50 that are terminated just with fire from heaven because the king just inquired if he was going to recover. So he wanted that information, and he went to Baal-zebub, and Elijah doesn't like that. So he eventually sends 50 to 51, I guess, to Elijah, and then he sends it again, and they are consumed by fire that came down from heaven. So these are the king's own people. These are Israelites. And so really a third time the captain begs his way out of it. But a very unbelievable story of this Elijah who calls down fire over this infraction. So you will see this in the Hebrew text, that sometimes words are changed. Baal is sometimes changed to shame. And here, Baal-zebul is Baal the Prince, and that was changed to Baal-zebub, so Lord of the Flies. So they will use language to make a theological point and to discredit Baal in this case. In chapter 2 of 2 Kings, we have this amazing story of Elijah being taken up into heaven before he died. So he just rides a chariot of fire and ascends to the heavens, which is really unique for Israelite views, because the main view of death was that you went to a place called Sheol, which was thought to be under the earth. So this is actually a man ascending into heaven. When Yahweh was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, and I pronounce it Elisha, that seems to be how it's pronounced, and it's a woman's name in English now, Elisha. I think that might actually be close to the Hebrew, but in any case, I call it Elisha, like most scholars. "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, as Yahweh lives, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. Later on, This is chapter 2, verse 8. Then both were standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took up his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water. The water was parted to one side to the other until the two of them crossed dry ground. Another of these tremendous, unbelievable miracle stories. In chapter 9, when they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." So if you really looked at that at first, you might think, oh, he wants double of what Elijah has. But the idea here is that Elijah had many followers. So say he had 10 followers. Elisha wants a double share that the others get. So if everyone gets, say, 10%, he would get 20%. So that's what asking here. He's not asking to be doubly powerful as Elijah. As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. What a tremendous sentence. So chariot of fire and horses of fire just lifted him into the heavens. Elisha kept watching and crying out, "Father, Father." So not literally his father, but the leader of the prophetic guild. And then he just goes, "The chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. So this idea of tearing clothes as a sign of grief, because Elijah has departed. So we have this idea of Elijah as this prophet taken to heaven. And in Passover dinners, I believe the tradition is an empty chair for Elijah. Maybe he will show up in his wanderings. In Malachi, it is said, "For I will send you the prophet Elijah before the arrival of the great and terrible day of the Lord." So this sense that Elijah will come back as a precursor to Judgment Day or an apocalypse. And we see that in the New Testament, people would sometimes ask, who do the people say that Jesus is? And some say, Elijah come back. And we do see in some of the miracles of Jesus some copying or patenting of the miracles of Elijah. Elisha then takes the mantle he got from Elijah and strikes the water, and it is parted again, which goes to show the purpose of those passages, that the powers of Elijah, or the powers of God that were called down by Elijah, now Elisha can also do them. In verse 2:19, now the people of the city said to Elisha, "The location of this city is good, as my Lord sees, but the water is bad, and the land is unfruitful." And what he does is he makes the water of the land wholesome. And if you are a misbehaving boy, you better watch out in these times. Chapter 2:23. He went up from there to Bethel, and while he was going on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him. They're talking about Elisha. "Go away, bald head, go away, bald head." When he turned around and saw them, he cursed them in the name of Yahweh. Then 2 she-bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. From there he went on to Mount Carmel. So yeah, this instantaneous justice for calling the prophet a baldy. Chapter 3 of 2 Kings really is a fascinating story for a couple of reasons. First of all, it deals with this war between Israel and Judah with Moab. Moab is a kingdom at the time, was just opposite Judah, so just on the other side of the Dead Sea. And Israel came in the north and the Jordan Valley and east of the Jordan, touching Moab in the north. So Israel and Judah are going to war against Moab. And to understand this, we have this Great historical evidence with the Moabite stone, or sometimes called a stele, and even stele is pronounced different ways, but the Moabite stone. So let's look at that. Paragraph 3. Omri was the king of Israel. So this is this Moabite stone, and we've seen this before. And that is actually historically accurate. So here we are seeing some real historical validation of the biblical text. Omri actually was a king in Israel. He oppressed Moab for many days, and Chemosh, the god of Moab, was angry. And so Omri's son succeeded him and said, I will also oppress Moab. In my days he did so, but I looked down on him and on his house, and Israel has gone to ruin. Yes, it has gone to ruin forever. And that's, I guess you could say, an overstatement or a hopeful statement, because Israel was not gone forever. Omri had taken possession of the whole land of Medeba, and he lived there in his days. But Chemosh, the god, restored it. So here we have some real historical validation. Omri was actually a king of Israel, and we have this validation. Now, in paragraph 7, we have the following. Chemosh said to me, go take Nebo from Israel. So take this city from Israel. Here we have an insight into the theology and the politics of the time, where we actually have a national god. So Chemosh, the god of Moab, telling them to attack Israel, just as in the Hebrew scriptures we have Yahweh telling various kings where to attack. And I went in the night, and I fought against it from the break of dawn until noon. And I took it, I killed its whole population. So here we also have a validation of this idea of genocidal warfare, of complete warfare, where everyone is killed or some are taken as slaves. 7,000 male citizens and aliens, female citizens, servant girls. For I had it put to the ban of Aster Chemosh, and from there I took the vessels of Yahweh, and I hauled them before the face of Chemosh. So he takes some of the sacred vessels, and here we have validation of the name Yahweh as well in the Moabite stone. So this gives us a lot of insight into how war was conducted, what the names of the various gods are, and it's just amazing historically, and we're going to see even more in chapter 3 of interest. We are in chapter 3 of 2 Kings, and we have this fascinating story. Now, King Mesha of Moab was a sheep breeder. I don't know if that's an insult or whatnot, who used to deliver the king of Israel 100,000 lambs, the wool of 100,000 rams. So sort of a vassal state. Israel had conquered them when King Ahab was alive. So they had been conquered before, but they have grown strong. Again, those figures may have been inflated. But when Ahab died, the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. So King Jehoram marched out of Samaria, so Samaria, the capital city of Israel, at that time, and mustered all Israel. And he sent word to King Jehoshaphat of Judah. The king of Moab has rebelled against me. Will you go with me to battle against Moab? And they do. And so this is what Elisha says to the king of Israel. What have I to do with you? Go to your father's prophets or to your mother's. But the king of Israel said to him, no, it is Yahweh who has summoned us. 3 kings, only to be handed over to Moab? Elisha said, as Yahweh of hosts lives, whom I serve, were it not that I have regard for King Jehoshaphat of Judah, I would give you neither a look nor a glance. But bring me a musician. So there is this idea of musicians help get the prophets into a trance. And then when the musician was playing, the power of Yahweh came upon him. And he said, Thus says the Lord, make a wadi full of pools. For thus says the Lord, Yahweh, you shall see neither wind nor rain, but the wadi shall be filled with water. This is only a trifle in the sight of Yahweh, for he will also hand Moab over to you. You shall conquer every fortified city and every choice city. Every good tree you shall fell. So cut down every tree. And that is actually against the law of the Torah for such excessive warfare, where you actually destroy the trees. So the olive trees and other trees which are the sustenance of the land. So the Moabite army sees this water, perhaps in the sunrise or the reddish mud. They think it's blood. Israel seems to be winning the battle. And so we have further in verse 25, only at Ker Hareseth did the stone walls remain, until the slingers surrounded and attacked it. When the king of Moab saw that the battle was going against him, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through, opposite the king of Edom, but they could not. Then he took his firstborn son, who was about to succeed him, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. And a great wrath came upon Israel. So they withdrew from him and returned to their own land. So the story here is that the king of Moab sacrifices his own son, sets him on fire on the wall, and Chemosh, the god, has this wrath for Israel. Wow, what an amazing story. And we do have historical validation of this, these various wars between Israel and Moab. Now, did this actually happen? Well, there are sources outside the Bible that say yes, there were these kind of child sacrifices in times of a siege, when one army is besieging a city. Did this actually happen, or is this propaganda? Is this saying Moab would do such a terrible thing? Or is this propaganda in the sense of, why did Israel not conquer this fortified city? Because it says before that Moab will be handed over to Israel. So what a fascinating story this is. Is there a contradiction here in that Elisha says that Israel will conquer Moab, but then that doesn't occur because of this terrible child sacrifice? And then we can go back to Abraham's attempted sacrifice of Isaac, and we maybe can remind ourselves that the point of that story was that Israel would not do that. That is not part of the practice. It was a test, yes, but it was also a explanatory tale of why Israel would not sacrifice human beings. In chapter 4, we have yet another amazing miracle story. And Elisha, just like Elijah did, he brings back to life a young boy. And that story reads well on its own, and you can follow that pretty clearly. Again, we have another story of a resuscitation, of bringing a dead person back to life. And at the end of chapter 4, we have Elisha feeding 100 men. So this idea of miraculous feeding. And in the New Testament for Christians, we will see similar stories said of Jesus, these miraculous feedings of large people. In the New Testament, the number of people fed goes into the thousands.